Imagine living your daily lives with only 10 hours of electricity, having to stand in line for hours in order to fill up your car with petrol. And imagine no emergency hospital services due to a sheer lack of medicines. All this and a lot more is happening in the country of Sri Lanka, which at the moment is going through one of its worst economic crises till date. So in this episode, we will look at how the prospering nation of Sri Lanka got to the present stage of economic and political turmoil. Let's start. Sri Lanka, an island nation of 22 million, is facing an economic and political crisis which is the worst since the country gained independence in 1948. Food prices on the island nation rose by a record 30% in March of this year, with prices of essentials like rice and chicken rising more than 90% in the span of just a year. Petrol, diesel and gas prices have doubled over the past year, making the life of the common man in the country full of struggle. The country's foreign reserve, which at one point in time was the highest in the southern Asian countries, stands today only at $1.9 billion. And they have a mounting debt of close to $9 billion, which has to be paid this year itself. Now, there is no one reason that led to the current state in the country. Rather, multiple reasons and events over the past years have led to this perfect storm. This crisis has been years in the making, driven by a little bad luck and a lot of government mismanagement. Prior to this crisis, Sri Lanka's economy was largely dependent on two factors: tourism and agriculture. The country was one of the top tourist destinations in the world, and a record 2.3 million people visited the country in 2018. Tourism alone accounted for roughly 13% of the country's GDP. In 2019, there was a drop in tourists due to a series of terrorist attacks in the country, in which more than 50 foreign tourists were killed. And then, in early 2020, COVID hit the world, which put a hard stop for international travel for over a year, leading to a major bump in the economy for Sri Lanka. But as I said earlier, this was not the only reason for the current crisis. COVID hit the world tourism almost equally, but at this point the government mismanagement came that led to the situation spiraling out of control. In 2019, Gotabaya Rajapaksa won the elections and formed a new government in the country. Part of his party's election agenda was to cut VAT in half across the country in order to bolster consumer spending and boost the economy. The idea behind this logic is not flawed. Less tax would lead to more money in hand for the people, which in turn would lead to more spending from the consumers. But the timing of this was definitely not ideal. Apart from implementation flaws like lack of clarity for small and medium businesses, this change was introduced in late 2019. But in early 2020, COVID hit, which led to multiple different lockdowns, and the consumers who were being encouraged to spend more on goods were locked in their homes. Before all this, the country focused heavily on increasing investment for development and infrastructure projects. Given the large dependency on tourism and agriculture, the government at the time wanted to diversify the factors responsible for economic growth, and they started the dream project of Hambantota Port. This port was supposed to be the trade hub between the east and the west, and would be one of the biggest projects that the country had taken till date. Again, the idea here was good, but the execution was majorly flawed. Sri Lanka went to both US and India in order to get foreign funding for this project, but both countries rejected the proposal, deeming the project a financial disaster and its inability to turn itself into a profitable entity. Rather than learning from this, the country went to China, infamous for its debt-trapping methods, who funded $1.2 billion in loan to Sri Lanka. As predicted by everyone, the project failed, and China, which was already gaining interest on the money it lent to the country, got control of the port for 99 years. China is infamous for such practices in developing nations, lending money for a not-so-good project and then taking them over. What all this meant was that the country had a massive debt pile to pay, which led to more borrowing and higher inflation. Combine that with the tourism crisis, the VAT implementation and lockdowns, it became a recipe for disaster. The local currency has now devalued by 25% in the past few months. There have been protests against the current government by the local people, demanding the resignation of the president. but the government has imposed strict curfews to curb any sort of violence. So what's next? Sri Lanka is now seeking financial support from the IMF and turning to regional powers that may be able to help. The country has also requested help from India, who has issued a credit line of $1 billion in March. But some analysts have warned that this assistance might prolong the crisis rather than solving it. It will take months for the country to come out of this crisis, but much uncertainty still remains on the government's future and the long-term impact on lives of the local population. I hope you learned something new from this video, and if you did, do drop in a like and subscribe to show your support for the channel. Thank you for watching.